This is a tale of the supernatural. It's the work of a man who wrote ghost stories as a sideline. The author, M.R. James, was an archaeologist, medieval historian, and a great expert on the early history of the Bible. He was vice-chancellor at Cambridge University during the First World War, and later became the provost of Eton, where he died in 1936. He's best known for his ghost stories, all of which have a peculiar atmosphere of cranky scholarship. The darkest of them is called Whistle and I'll Come to You. It's a story of solitude and terror, and it has a moral too. It hints at the dangers of intellectual pride and shows how a man's reason can be overthrown when he fails to acknowledge those forces inside himself which he simply cannot understand.
Good afternoon, sir. Professor Till?
Yes, sir. All right, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. How much is that?
3 cents, please.
Shillings. Anybody there? Anybody there? Professor Parkin. I telephoned to you from Cambridge. Booked here for a week.
Sign the register?
Oh, yes, of course.
Coming for the golf, I suppose.
No, I'm afraid I don't play golf.
Oh.
Very much. If at all. Yeah. About my bag.
I'll bring him in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Up we go. Up we go. Oh, Sunday. Has it been good here?
Hey?
The weather?
Oh,
Yeah. Ah. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, yeah.
Bathroom,
Yes.
Dinner late.
At 8 o'clock. Dinner. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes. Library. St. James's. Well. Hmm. Bread. Yes.
Run your bath, sir. Your bath's ready, sir. Professor Parkin? Shall I turn down your bed, sir?
Turn down the bed. Turn down the bed. Yeah. Turn down the bed. You, I think a little haddock. Come in, miss.
Quite sure you wouldn't care for a round after all, Professor?
No, I don't think I will. I'll go for a good trudge around the district. Mm-hmm. Take a packed lunch, perhaps. Look at the dunes, beach, cemetery.
Oh, a bit too spooky for me.
Spooky. Is it? Spooky. the bone. Find those keepers. Ah, cha-cha-cha-cha. Dirty. Inscription. 101 things a boy can do. Quiz. Yes. Yes. Iste. Win it. Who is this? Who is coming? Well, we shall blow it and see.
Do you believe in ghosts, Professor?
Ghosts? Huh. That's rather a sticky one, isn't it? I'm not quite certain what you mean. I mean, I'm never quite certain what I'm being invited to believe when anybody asks me a question like that. I'm not even quite certain what I'm being invited to disbelieve when it comes to that.
We're quite with you, old chap.
No, well, I mean, you ask me, do I believe in, say, Australia? Well, now I know perfectly well what sort of thing I'm being asked to judge. I mean, we all agree what we mean by Australia. Large continent, southern hemisphere, discovered by Captain Cook, 4 or 5 large cities, kangaroos, and so on and so on. And given that, one can perfectly well imagine the sort of procedure that one might put in hand to confirm or, on the other hand, to disconfirm its existence. It's not quite the same thing with ghosts, is it? I mean, there's no broad consensus about what a ghost is there?
You've done me a bit of a Chinaman on that one. Let's think now. Ghosts. The spirits of the dead. The survival of the human personality.
Survival of the human personality. Well, now, that's a different question again, really. And it has the grammatical appearance of a real question, but I wonder, does it really mean anything either? Does it? Well, let's see. We say, for the sake of argument, that the human personality survives death. Right?
Right.
Well, now, but would we say it in the same way that we might say, for example, that someone survived a train crash?
Yes.
No, but would we?
Yes.
Would we, you see? I mean, we say, don't we, that Pausanias survived the train crash, but was very badly injured by it. Now, we wouldn't want to say that Pausanias survived death, but was very badly injured by it. Would we? I mean, we wouldn't want to say that. Would we? No. Well, clearly here we have a logical difference of usage, in that death, in a sense, is not like other physical catastrophes. I mean, one doesn't talk about anyone being very badly hurt by death. Oh, well. Except possibly the relatives of the deceased. But never the victim himself, excluding, of course, the special interpretation in which one might say that he had been injured fatally by death. Or for that matter, that she had.
True. But there are more things in heaven and earth than in your philosophy.
No. I prefer to put it a different way. There are more things in philosophy than are dreamt of in heaven and earth. More things in heaven and earth. Delicious breakfast.
No, I don't think I will take on it. Well, I tell you what, it goes roughly the way I go. I can show you...
Oh, that's very good of you. Put me on my way.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, what have we got? Yes, yes, there are more things in philosophy than are dreamt of in heaven and earth. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Sand. Who is this who is coming?
Parkin.
Yes.
Where shall I put the blanket, sir?
Where?
Well, which bed do you want it on, sir?
Which bed? Which bed? Yes, my bed. Hmm? Well, my bed.
Well, which is your bed, sir? You seem to have slept in them both. They're both rumpled.
Both?
But didn't you notice that both beds had been slept in, sir?
No, madam, I did not like it.
But it's ridiculous. I can't understand why you didn't notice it, sir. Perhaps you moved from one bed to the other in the middle of the night.
In the habit of moving from one bed to the other in the middle of the night. Rumpled, it certainly is, yes. Rumpled. I've not been in my room since breakfast. Has anyone else got keys?
Oh, only we two, sir, and yourself.
Phenomenon. 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 Well, I'll leave you to straighten up. Silly old Bradley. Ah? Spiritualism, if true, demonstrates mind without brain and intelligence, disconnected from what is termed a material body. It demonstrates that the so-called dead are still alive and that our friends are still with us, though unseen. The present article may be taken as a denial of these theses, and jolly good. I don't like tomatoes. I told them I didn't like tomatoes. Tomatoes and the root, I don't taste anything.
Who is this who is coming?
Yeah, well,
Oh, no.
I think I'll...
Oh, no.
I'll
Oh, no.
just...
Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. No.
It's a shame you children never knew your grandpa. Oh, he was such a gentleman. Problem was, people confused his gentleness with sneakiness. I couldn't tell you why. Why, in other towns, you'd have your undertakers being well thought of. Town council members, maybe even mayors, like over in Willow Creek. Even if it was just for 2 years. But not here in town. Not for Grandpa. I suspect some folks thought he never should have been an undertaker, quiet and shy as he was. But one May Day, we were all coming out of the soda parlor on Market Street. It's long gone now. And he was walking by. Well, some of the others started to giggle, and he turned red right off. And I just thought, he looks so nice. So I shushed the others real sharp, and they shut up fast. But the shush I made was so loud it startled him. And he stopped dead in his tracks and just looked at me like I'd been shushing him. Well, the other girls had a heyday with that. The next time I saw the girls, they acted funny, like I might be mad at them. I was a little, I guess. But they said no more about the day before, and neither did I, so we were friends again, and I sort of forgot about the whole thing. That's why it was a big surprise a few days later when my daddy told me the undertaker'd come to see him in the store where he clerked and asked for permission to come call in on me. Along about 7 o'clock, he came up the walk carrying a bunch of flowers. For the longest time, Grandpa and I just sat there, he on the old wing chair, me across the room in a side chair with Mother's needlework on the seat and back. Neither one of us said a word, and finally he cleared his throat, and he was wondering if I enjoyed the moving pictures. I allowed as how I did, and then he asked me if I would be interested in accompanying him. That's the word he used, accompanying, to the U.S. Theater the next night to see The Old Homestead. But right then and there, I was just so flustered that I didn't know how to make up a lie. Boys just didn't ask me out, not even boys I didn't want to go out with, and I had no experience with such things. So I just nodded and said, all right. And he got the sweetest, happiest smile on his face that right off I was glad I'd said yes. And that night Grandpa came by for me, and we went to the pictures. I didn't see anyone I knew when we went in, and I felt ashamed that I was glad of it. The movie was good. It was the first time I'd ever heard Grandpa laugh. And such a sweet laugh he had, like music. He never touched my hand once, nor put an arm around me. When the show was over and the lights came on, I saw Mandy Dawson sitting 2 rows back with her fella, looking at me like the cat that just ate the bird, and I knew she'd start spreading the news that very night. Next morning, I sat with him in church, and I think it surprised my mother as much as it did my friends. Oh, they gave me the dirt at first. But once they knew that I'd see who I wanted to see, they left me be quick enough. Some of them left me be for good, though my best friends stuck by me, Marion and Dorothy and Katie. In fact, they confessed that they'd always thought Grandpa was sort of cute, no matter what he did. But we never talked about it directly. Leastways, not till he asked me to marry him. We'd been going out together for maybe 5 months when he'd got up the nerve. I loved that man sure enough, but if you told me I'd be feeling that way 6 months earlier, I'd have called you crazy. Once we got to my house, we didn't go straight in, but sat on the porch swing in that autumn chill and talked real low so's my mother and Daddy wouldn't hear. He told me a lot about himself I'd never heard before. How he'd become an undertaker because his daddy had been one, and it was the only thing he'd been taught. By that time, Mother knew Grandpa well enough to know what a good man I was getting. But even I didn't know how good he really was. I found out that winter. It was a monstrous cold winter. We had our first big snow in mid-November, and it must have been 2 feet deep at least. It never got cold enough to melt it until early March, so snow piled on top of snow, and it just got deeper and deeper. The roads stayed open, though. Seemed every time you looked, the Hastings boys were out plowing them. Don't know how much the town paid them that winter, but the next spring, both Dick and Bob started new houses. Grandpa had a hard time, too. The ground was frozen solid, and the Hastings boys, who also dug the graves of the Upper and Lower Dellfield cemeteries, nearly doubled their price because of it. Grandpa once told me he'd probably paid for their chimneys that winter. He wouldn't pass on the extra price to his customers, though. Claimed that a loved one's death was bad luck enough, so the freeze was his bad luck. But it wasn't because of the snows alone that folks remembered that winter. 20 years later, you'd mention that winter, and folks would say, "Wasn't that the year Roy Stoller got killed trying to rob the feed store?" It wasn't often that things like that would happen, even in Lower Dellfield. First shooting death, my daddy said, since Amos Martin accidentally killed his cousin Wilbur when they were hunting back in '03. I don't think it surprised anyone, though, leastways not anyone who knew about Roy Stoller. Roy was a bad un, no 2 ways about it. He just seemed doomed for something like that to happen. His daddy was mostly no account, and his mother died when he was born. Roy quit his schooling when he was only 10 to help his daddy try to pull some harvest out of that scrubby 10 acres they called a farm. Now I expect that 10 acres would fetch a fair price, but back then it was worthless. After old Mr. Stoller died, Roy gave up farming and just lived there in the farmhouse, tending a little vegetable patch and keeping mostly to himself, except when he'd come into town for supplies or to drink at Rohrer's Tavern. Nobody knew for sure where he got the money he needed, but there'd been some talk of insurance money on his daddy, and some folks said he stole. They were proved right, of course. He spent a few days in jail, on and off, especially after drinking nights, mostly from picking fights in the tavern. Had no friends, none at all. People didn't like him much and seemed to stay away. A couple of weeks after Christmas, he broke into the feed store through a back window. He didn't know Mr. Wenger was working late in his office, and Mr. Wenger surprised him with a pistol. Roy Stoller had a gun, too, and shot first, but missed. Then Mr. Wenger shot Roy right in the head. The doc said he was dead before he hit the floor. There were no relatives and no estate to speak of, so the county was supposed to pay a local undertaker $50 to bury him. The sheriff took him to Frank Whedon first, but Whedon wouldn't do it. Said it'd be bad for his business handling criminals. But Grandpa said he'd take Roy. And next day, when he told me he'd done it, I didn't like it. But I didn't say anything except something about the $50 being a small price to get for tarnishing his business. He got real serious then, as near to mad as I'd ever seen him before or since, and told me that no matter what folks had done, it wasn't ours to judge them once they were dead, but rather to give them as much dignity and kindness as we could, for they'd be judged quick enough by someone far higher. Then he said Roy Stoller had never had a chance for anything in his life, and how he was more to be pitied than anything else. His words made me feel pretty small, though I was still concerned with what other folks might think. But that didn't bother Grandpa in the least, and he even gave back to the county what was left of the $50 after he'd paid his costs on the coffin and the grave digging. I won't profit off an unfortunate, he said, and nobody was more unfortunate than Roy Stoller. Grandpa put him next to his daddy in the lower Delfield Cemetery. At the funeral, there was just him and me and the Negro pastor from the Baptist church over in West Davis. The Delfield ministers were all busy that day, so they said. We got married in early February, a week after my 20th birthday. We hadn't had snow for almost 2 weeks, and the sun was shining bright as anything. The temperature was just below freezing, and after the winter we'd been through, it felt like the South Seas. It was just a small wedding. I only invited my closest friends and their families. Since Grandpa had no real friends to speak of, I made sure Mother had the 2 ushers seat some of the guests on the groom's side. Grandpa looked handsome, and the mirror told me I was as pretty as I was ever gonna be. And it was a nice wedding. Although at the end of the vows, when we said, "Till death do us part," I got that funny feeling again. It just came over me. And I wondered, if I died first, if he'd take care of me, make me ready for the grave. It was a dark thought, and it had no place at a happy thing like a wedding, so right then I drove it out of my head. But I thought about it for a long time afterwards. We had the reception in the church basement, and my daddy and mother were both happy but teary-eyed. Grandpa was chattering away with the guests and members of the wedding, just like he'd never been shy in his life. And I remember thinking, well, Jiminy Christmas, this man should have got married a long time ago. Some of the people there that day became his friends for life. I'd asked him where we were to go on our honeymoon, but he wouldn't tell me. A surprise was all he'd say, but no Niagara Falls or anything like that. Somewhere that we can keep, he whispered, and I just couldn't work out what he meant. After the reception, we went back to my daddy's house to pick up my suitcase, and then we climbed into Grandpa's Model T, and off we went, out of Upper Delfield and through Lower Delfield, then up into the hills north of here, which surprised me. All the cities and towns of any size are all east and south, but we headed north instead. I said as how I hoped we'd get to where we were going before too long, as night was coming on, and the sky had turned dark, like there was snow coming. Don't worry, he told me, we're almost there now. And sure enough, in another mile, he turned the car up this dirt road smack dab through the woods. It looked like it had just been plowed that day, for you could see the brown earth in patches through the snow. Looks like the Hastings boys made it, he said. And I asked him just what was going on here, and he said, you'll see. Finally, we came to a spot where the lane ended, and the trees got too thick for an automobile to pass. We walk from here, he said, and lifted me out of the car. Then he takes 2 pairs of snowshoes from the back of the Model T, and I just looked at him. He asked me if I'd ever walked on them before, and of course I hadn't, so he showed me how. I was still asking him what it was all about, but he wouldn't tell me. Just picked up my suitcase and his and asked me to follow him. "Whither thou goest," he said, and laughed. By that time it was nearly dark, and it had started to snow as well, big wet flakes that looked like white leaves falling in the dusk. We followed a little trail through the trees, and I could see other snowshoe tracks. So I asked whose they were. Grandpa said they were his. It was just light enough so we didn't need a lantern when we got to the cabin. It was in a little open space in the woods, and a small stream solid with ice was next to it. It was the prettiest little building I'd ever seen, made of light brown logs. There was a black shingle roof and a green door and shutters, and mostly covered with snow as it was, it looked like something from a fairy tale. I felt Grandpa's arm around my shoulders, and he asked me if I liked it. There was no doubt of that. I thought there couldn't have been a better place in the world for 2 people who loved each other to be alone. He told me his father had built it years before, but after he died, Grandpa rented it to an old trapper who finally had to give up his line that past year because of his legs and move in with relatives. Grandpa had been coming up here for months fixing it up as a surprise for me. I hugged him hard and told him I couldn't wait to see inside. So we tramped the rest of the way through the snow, which was falling thicker now, and went inside and lit a lantern. It was beautiful. He'd put curtains at all the windows and hung some pictures on the walls. At one end was a little table with 2 chairs, a dry sink, and a wood stove with cupboards full of dishes and food. There were 3 chairs and a fireplace in the middle of the room, and at the other end was a chest of drawers and a bed behind a big red curtain he'd rigged up so as to give me my privacy. But right then, I didn't want any privacy. Not from him, anyway. I hugged him and kissed him and said as how it would be a wonderful honeymoon. And he laughed that gentle, low laugh and said it would be if we didn't freeze first. He took the lantern over to the big open fireplace and touched a match to the kindling he'd got ready before. It caught fast and started crackling and popping for fair. It must have been a pine knot or something like it that cracked so loud and threw a hot spark into the lantern, but at the time I could have sworn it was a bomb. The lantern just exploded. I didn't see it, just heard it. And when I turned around and looked, Grandpa was falling over like a big tree, and fire was jumping all over the wooden floor. I didn't bother to scream, but yanked down the curtain and started beating out the fire with it. It didn't take long, and then I looked at Grandpa. He'd been scarcely singed, but a piece of that thick, heavy glass from the lantern's base had hit him right on the temple, cutting him open and making him bleed something fierce. He wasn't conscious either. I ripped a hunk out of my slip and tried to stop the blood, but it kept coming, slow and steady, and I knew that I had to get him to a doctor fast. I thought of dragging him out to the car on a blanket, but even if I could do it, the jolting might do him worse than leaving him be. We had only the one lantern, so by the light of the fire I lit some candles, then pressed down on Grandpa's cut and tried to think. It was dark as pitch now, and the snow was falling so thick and the wind blowing so hard, it seemed the cabin's roof might blow clean off. There was no way I could get him out, and I wondered if I could find the way out myself and bring back help. I thought as how that was the only way I could save him, so I put some logs on the fire to keep him warm, tied a bandage tight around his head, bundled myself up as much as I could, and went outside on the snowshoes. I hadn't gone 20 yards before I knew it was impossible. Even if the trail had been plain in front of me, I couldn't have seen it. So I turned around and made my way back to the cabin, following the little glow of fire through the windows. Grandpa was no better, still unconscious, though the bleeding had slowed a little. But his breathing was real funny, and I don't mind telling you children I was scared more than I'd ever been, being purely certain he'd die before I could ever get out and maybe bring back somebody the next day. All I could do was sit there on the floor, holding his poor bleeding head in my lap, and pray. I prayed that night like Jesus must have prayed in the garden. And I'm not sure if God heard me or not, but I know something did. For some time in that long night, I heard through the wind a knocking on the cabin door. No footsteps on the boards of the porch, but just a knocking, 3 times, real slow-like. I didn't even think. I just ran to the door and flung it open, and I saw Roy Stoller standing there on the porch. I knew it was him. I'd seen his face before, and it looked fairly as it must have when he was alive. You'll remember the winter had been cold, and the ground was frozen. So what was under the ground stayed frozen, too. I could still see the little mark in his forehead where Grandpa had closed up the bullet hole. And the firelight was bright enough that I recognized the old suit of Grandpa's that he'd dressed him in. I just stepped back, and Roy Stoller walked into the cabin, went over to Grandpa, and picked him up as lightly as if he were a child. Then he walked to the cabin door with him and turned and looked at me like he was waiting. And something in his dead face told me that it was good he wanted to do, not bad. So I bundled up again and put on the snowshoes, and though it took all my courage to do it, I wrapped a blanket around Grandpa as he lay in Roy Stoller's arms. Then Roy Stoller walked out the door into the storm, and I followed him. He didn't glow or nothing, and he didn't talk at all, but I had no trouble following him, even though I couldn't see him. It was like there was some kind of warmth coming from him, and I just followed it. Before too long, we were at the car, and Roy Stoller put Grandpa in the back. I just stood there, not knowing what to do next. I'd never driven a car, only ridden in one since I'd been going with Grandpa. So Roy Stoller got it started right up and got in the driver's side, while I climbed into the back with Grandpa. I wondered how we'd get through the snow. About a foot had fallen, and you couldn't even see the lane we'd come in on. But that didn't worry Roy Stoller none. The automobile just seemed to drift over the snow, and when I looked behind, I couldn't see any tracks we'd made. We drove for what seemed like ages, passing nary another automobile, though that snow was so thick we wouldn't have seen another car's lights even if anyone had been foolish enough to be out that night. Finally, the Model T slowed down and just floated to a stop. And I swear I could feel it, and us, sink slowly and softly into the deep snow on the ground. Roy Stoller didn't do anything, just sat there, looking out into the night like he'd done all he could. I looked out to the right and saw a dim light glowing, so I climbed out of the car and walked through the snow toward it. I was just amazed when I saw where I was, right in the middle of town, and that glowing light was a lamp in Doc Farnsworth's window. I pounded on the door till Doc's wife opened it and called her husband down from upstairs. I took him by the hand and led him out to the automobile, not even wondering what Doc would do when he saw dead Roy Stoller sitting behind the wheel, only worrying about Grandpa and wanting to get him into the warm as quick as could be. But Roy Stoller wasn't in the car anyway, and when Doc was hauling Grandpa up onto his shoulders, I looked out into the dark but couldn't see him anywhere. There were no tracks of his walking away either, Though even if there had been, the wind might have blown them away just that quick. But I don't think there were. You children all know that Grandpa didn't die. He came to the next day, and Doc said it had been a good thing I'd got Grandpa to him when I did, that he just might have bled to death. It was peculiar. From the second Roy Stoller picked Grandpa up in his arms, the bleeding stopped. But soon as Doc took him from the car, I could see it had started again. Of course, Doc got it stopped fast once we were inside. He knew how. When Grandpa woke up and realized where he was, he asked me how I did it, how I got him back to town. So I told him about Roy Stoller. I wasn't sure, and I'm still not sure to this day whether he believed me or not, because he smiled a smile that could have meant he thought I was seeing things. Or likewise, it might have been a smile he smiled because he knew he'd been right about the way he thought about and treated the dead folks. A few days later, when he was up and around, and the snow had long since stopped, we went down to the Lower Dellfield Cemetery and looked at Roy Stoller's grave. It was under the snow, same as the rest, and when Grandpa brushed the snow away to see the earth beneath, it looked like any fresh grave, with no sign that anything'd come out of it. But still, that wasn't proof that something hadn't. There was nothing else at the grave. No piece of the blanket I'd wrapped around Grandpa, or any of the clues you'd expect to find in a real old-fashioned ghost story. Just the snow and the hard earth. I left some flowers I'd brought along. Roses. They looked real pretty on the white snow. And I hoped as we walked away that maybe what Roy Stoller done that night would help to make up for the bad he'd done when he was alive. The more I thought about it, the more I was sure that it should just plumb erase that badness, wipe it away. For all he'd done, Roy Stoller never killed anybody, but he did save a life, and I was mighty thankful to him for it. I was thankful, too, that Grandpa was the man he was, that he'd done good for Roy Stoller from his heart. At first I thought that what he'd said about kindness to the dead was nice but foolish. But now I know better. It wasn't ever too late to be kind. And you can be kind even to people's memories. And it might be known to them and appreciated. Grandpa taught me that lesson. He taught me other things, too. And he taught me good. Why, you children can just look at yourselves if you don't believe me. Oh, I hope you don't mind me calling you children, but that's how I think of you, especially since Grandpa and I never had any of our own. It just seemed natural for us to call you our children. After all, we care for you, comfort you, lay you down in your last sleep. There now, all finished and all ready. That wasn't bad, was it? I just wish Grandpa was still alive to see how peaceful you look. Yes, peaceful. I may not be the best or the fanciest undertaker in these parts, but I dare hope to say I'm the most gentle.